This is not an accident. This moment did not drift into your life by chance, and these words are not passing through your ears without purpose. There are times when heaven does not whisper but interrupts, when the spiritual realm does not nudge gently but stands directly in your path. What you are hearing now is one of those moments. The message in this title carries weight because it reflects a spiritual reality many ignore until it is too late. When Archangel Michael speaks, it is never for entertainment, never for curiosity, and never without urgency. His voice carries the authority of divine order, and when he commands attention, it is because something critical is unfolding in the unseen realm. Right now, heaven is calling, and this call is personal. There are seasons when God allows silence, and there are moments when silence becomes a warning. Many people misunderstand this. They think unanswered prayers mean rejection, delay, or distance. But there is another truth, one rarely spoken about, because it requires responsibility rather than comfort. Sometimes heaven grows quiet not because God has left, but because he is waiting for obedience. Spiritual silence is not absence. It is a pause loaded with consequence. It is the stillness before a door closes or a window shifts. And when that silence appears, it is often preceded by a call like this one. Archangel Michael is known as the enforcer of divine order, the one who stands at the boundary between chaos and alignment. His role is not to persuade but to protect what God has established. When the message says, "I order you to open this now," it is not about dominance or fear. It is about urgency. It is about timing. Heaven operates on appointed moments, and missing one does not always bring immediate punishment, but it does bring distance. Distance in clarity. Distance in peace. Distance in answered prayer. That is why this call feels heavy. That is why your spirit felt a pull before your mind understood why you were here. God does not call randomly. When he calls, it is because something is required of you in that moment. The danger is not that God stops listening forever, but that the channel between heaven and your awareness becomes dull. Prayer is not just words spoken upward. It is alignment. When alignment is off, prayers feel like they fall flat, not because God is cruel, but because something is misaligned in the spiritual posture of the one praying. Heaven's silence is often an invitation to realign, but only if it is recognized in time. This is why ignoring moments like this carries weight. Not because God is fragile or easily offended, but because obedience is how spiritual connection stays alive. Scripture shows again and again that God speaks before he acts. He warns before he shifts seasons. He calls before he allows consequences to mature. When people ignore those calls, the silence that follows feels like abandonment, but it is actually restraint. Heaven holding back, waiting to see if the heart will turn back without force. Right now, you are standing at a crossroads you may not have noticed until this very second. One path continues as usual, filled with routine prayers, familiar struggles, and the quiet frustration of waiting. The other path begins with attention, with humility, with a willingness to say, "I hear you." This is why this message had to be opened now. Timing matters more in the spiritual realm than most people realize. Delayed obedience is not neutral. It shifts outcomes. The phrase "God is calling" is not symbolic here. It reflects a stirring that has already been happening in your life. The restlessness you have felt, the sense that something is unfinished, the repeated thoughts that return when everything else is quiet. Those are not random. They are echoes of a call you may have tried to ignore because it required change, courage, or surrender. Heaven does not shout without reason. And when that call is ignored repeatedly, silence is sometimes allowed, not as punishment, but as contrast. so the soul can recognize what it is missing. This message is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to awaken you. Fear paralyzes, but awareness empowers. God's intention is never to block prayer, but to restore its power. Yet restoration always begins with recognition. Recognition that something is being asked of you. Recognition that comfort has kept you still longer than obedience ever should. Recognition that spiritual moments do not wait forever. If you feel a tightening in your chest, a sudden focus, or a quiet seriousness settling over you, that is not coincidence. That is your spirit responding before your mind begins to argue. The mind looks for logic, proof, and reassurance. The spirit recognizes truth instantly. This is why this opening matters. This is why the title itself feels confrontational. Sometimes truth must confront before it can heal. As this message unfolds, you will begin to understand what heaven is asking of you and why this moment cannot be postponed. You are not being threatened with abandonment. You are being invited into alignment. The silence spoken of is not the end, but the warning before distance grows. God calls because he wants connection, not because he wants to withdraw it. And Archangel Michael stands at the threshold of this message because protection often begins with attention. This is the beginning, not the conclusion. What you do with this awareness will shape everything that follows. When God calls personally, it never sounds like noise, and it never arrives dressed as chaos. It comes quietly but firmly, pressing against the soul in a way that cannot be shaken off. This is where many misunderstand divine communication. They expect thunder, visions, or dramatic signs, but God often speaks through repetition, through persistent inner nudges, through moments that interrupt routine. The call does not demand attention at first. It invites it. And the tragedy is not that people cannot hear God, but that they explain his voice away as coincidence, stress, or imagination. There is a difference between God calling a crowd and God calling an individual. When he calls personally, the message follows you. It appears in thoughts you did not summon, in questions that surface during quiet moments, in a restlessness that refuses to settle. You may still function, still pray, still believe, but something feels unresolved. That is often the sign that God has already spoken, and he is waiting for response rather than repeating himself endlessly. Heaven values attention, not volume. Many people assume that if God truly wanted their response, he would force it. But forced obedience produces fear, not faith. God desires alignment, not compliance. This is why the call comes gently at first. Yet when the gentle call is consistently ignored, it grows weightier, not louder. The urgency increases, not the volume. And that is where messages like this appear, not to shock you into panic, but to pierce through spiritual numbness that may have formed over time. There are seasons when God allows comfort to lull people into delay. Life continues, responsibilities pile up, distractions feel justified, and spiritual urgency fades into the background. But heaven does not forget what it has spoken. A calling does not expire because it was inconvenient. It waits. And waiting does not mean inactive. It means accumulating consequence. Not consequence as punishment, but as pressure. Pressure that builds until a decision becomes unavoidable. You may have noticed patterns recently. Prayers that feel rehearsed rather than alive. Worship that feels distant. Scripture that once stirred you now feels quiet. These are not signs of failure. They are signals. Signals that God is not asking for more effort, but for attention. Attention to what he already revealed. Attention to what you postponed. attention to what you sensed but did not act upon. This is where divine alarms exist, not to scare, but to awaken. When heaven interrupts your scroll, your routine, your mental noise, it is because time matters. Not because God is running out of patience, but because seasons shift whether we are ready or not. Missing a season does not erase God's love, but it can delay fulfillment, peace, and clarity far longer than necessary. Right now, this message itself is part of the call. Not everyone hears it the same way. Some will feel curiosity and move on. Others will feel resistance and close it quickly. But some feel recognition, a deep, quiet knowing that this is connected to something God has already been pressing on their heart. If that is you, then understand this. Awareness is responsibility. Once you recognize a call, neutrality disappears. There is no standing still. There is either movement toward alignment or movement away from sensitivity. This is why responding matters, even in small ways. Obedience does not always begin with dramatic change. Sometimes it begins with acknowledgement, a simple internal yes, a willingness to listen beyond comfort, a decision to stop postponing the conversation God has been trying to have with you. Heaven responds to posture before it responds to action. If this message is stirring something in you, do not treat it as entertainment. Treat it as an invitation. Engage with it intentionally. Pause. Reflect. And if you sense that this word is not just for you, but for others who may be drifting in the same quiet distance, then do not keep it to yourself. This is where participation becomes alignment. Take a moment to like this message, not as a habit, but as a signal that you are paying attention. Share it with someone who may need this wake-up call but does not yet recognize it. Leave a comment, even a short one, as an act of acknowledgement, because when you engage outwardly, it often unlocks inward clarity. And if you feel led, subscribe to this space, not for content alone, but to remain connected to messages meant to sharpen spiritual awareness. God often uses simple actions to confirm deeper decisions. Engagement is not about algorithms, it is about intention. When you act deliberately, even digitally, you train your spirit to respond rather than delay. And heaven notices responsiveness far more than perfection. The call of God does not come to condemn your past silence. It comes to correct your present direction. There is still time. The very fact that you are hearing this means the line is not closed. The channel is still open. But openness requires response. The longer a call goes unanswered, the easier it becomes to ignore the next one. Sensitivity dulls gradually, not suddenly. Do not rush past this moment. Let it settle. Let it confront what it needs to confront. Let it awaken what has been dormant. God is not demanding your fear. He is inviting your attention. And attention is the doorway through which clarity, peace, and answered prayer return. What comes next will reveal why this call feels so specific and why this moment is more important than it appears right now. There is a kind of silence that feels peaceful, and there is a kind of silence that feels heavy. The silence being spoken of here is not rest, it is warning. It is the moment when prayers seem to rise but do not return with clarity, when words feel empty even though belief remains. Many people experience this and assume it is a test of patience, but Scripture and spiritual history reveal something deeper. Heaven's silence is often a signal that something has been ignored, not forgotten. It is not God turning away. It is God pausing the conversation until alignment is restored. When heaven grows quiet, it does not mean God has stopped listening. It means He is waiting. Waiting for attention. Waiting for obedience. waiting for the heart to recognize what the mind has been avoiding. Silence is not rejection. It is restraint. God restrains response because response without alignment would only deepen confusion. This is why some prayers feel blocked even when faith feels sincere. Faith without obedience creates noise, not connection. Throughout spiritual history, silence always comes before intervention. Before God moved nations, before he shifted destinies, before he rescued or corrected his people, there was often a period where his voice seemed distant. Not because he vanished, but because he had already spoken. The silence was not the absence of instruction. It was a consequence of ignored instruction. Heaven does not repeat itself endlessly. It waits to see if what was already said will be honored. This is where fear often enters, but fear is not the message here. Awareness is. If you have felt your prayers become mechanical, your worship feel routine, or your spiritual life feel muted, that is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of a signal that God is calling you back to something specific, something you recognize once but postpone. Silence grows when postponement becomes habit. Archangel Michael's presence in this message matters here. His role is to guard divine order. Silence exists to protect order from being misused. God will not pour clarity into chaos. He will not release answers where obedience hath been delayed intentionally. This is not cruelty. It is protection. More than help. Heaven's silence guards you from walking confidently in the wrong direction. Many people fear that silence means God has closed the door permanently. That is not true. Silence means the door is still there, but it requires intentional movement to open it again. The key has not been taken away. It has been waiting in your awareness. God never withholds access without first providing instruction. The silence you feel is not the end of prayer, but the invitation to reset posture. This is why moments like this are critical. Recognition changes everything. Once silence is understood, it loses its power to intimidate. It becomes directional. It tells you where to look, what to revisit, and what to surrender. Heaven speaks through silence when words would be ignored. And when the heart finally listens, the silence breaks. If you feel unsettled hearing this, do not suppress it. That discomfort is not condemnation. It is conviction's gentle cousin. It does not accuse, it points. It points back to the moment you delayed, the instruction you minimized, the step you sensed but avoided. God is not angry about delay. He is patient. But patience does not cancel purpose. It waits for readiness. Here is the truth many never hear. Prayer does not fail because God stops listening. It weakens when alignment is postponed. Silence is not distance. It is a pause designed to draw you closer. And the fact that you are hearing this now means the pause has not turned into closure. There is still time to respond. This is a sacred moment. Do not rush past it. Let it search you gently. Let it restore reverence for timing. Heaven is not silent to punish you. It is quiet to protect you from moving forward without clarity. Type "I hear" and "I obey" in the comments if this speaks to your spirit. Blessing code 314 is now activated. This word is reaching you because God intends it to reach many others who are standing in the same quiet silence. As you receive this message, hear the Lord saying, "As you sow into my voice, I open rivers where dryness live." When you support this mission, you are placing oil into a lamp that lights path for souls searching for direction. I feel led to tell you directly, your obedience here becomes a seed that multiplies far beyond what you can see. Scripture lives and breathes as God declares, "Give, and it shall be given back to you, pressed down and overflowing." This is not a donation. It is a prophetic response to what you just heard. Those who act now will feel clarity return and peace settle. Support through Super Thanks, membership, or PayPal. The link is in the description and the PayPal QR code is on the screen. Step into this moment and release what heaven is asking of you now. To fully grasp the seriousness of this moment, you must understand the authority behind it. Archangel Michael does not appear casually, and he does not speak without cause. His presence is always connected to divine order being threatened, delayed, or misunderstood. He is not sent when things are merely uncomfortable. He is sent when alignment is necessary. Michael stands as a guardian between God's instruction and human hesitation. His role is not emotional reassurance but spiritual enforcement. When he speaks, it is because something God has already established must be protected from being ignored any longer. In the spiritual realm, order is not about control, it is about flow. Everything God releases moves according to order, timing, and purpose. When that order is disrupted, the flow weakens. Prayer becomes strained. Direction becomes unclear. Peace feels distant even when faith remains. Archangel Michael's assignment is to restore that flow by confronting disorder at its root. Disorder does not always look like rebellion. Often, it looks like delay disguised as patience or comfort mistaken for peace. Michael is sent when those subtle shifts begin to endanger destiny. Many people misunderstand authority because they associate it with force or fear. But divine authority exists to preserve what is sacred. Michael's authority is not about domination. It is about protection. He enforces boundaries that keep purpose intact. When boundaries fade, purpose becomes diluted. Calling becomes optional. Obedience becomes negotiable. Michael intervenes before those patterns harden into identity. This is why the phrase "I order you" carries such weight. Heaven does not negotiate with time-sensitive instruction. When God speaks, it is because the moment is ripe. Delay does not make the instruction safer. It makes it riskier. Michael's voice carries the urgency of timing, not the threat of punishment. He does not command because God is angry. He commands because God is precise. Throughout spiritual history, Michael is associated with moments where lines must be drawn. He stands at thresholds. He guards transitions. He protects what is meant to move forward from being pulled backward by fear, comfort, or distraction. When you encounter a message marked by his authority, it means you are standing at such a threshold. Something is shifting, and neutrality is no longer possible. Divine order is often mistaken for restriction, but restriction only limits when it is disconnected from purpose. God's order liberates because it aligns effort with outcome. Without order, people work harder but achieve less. They pray longer but hear less. They try more but move slower. Michael's enforcement restores efficiency in the spirit. It removes friction caused by misalignment. This message is not suggesting that you are disobedient in nature. It is revealing that delay has quietly taken space it was never meant to occupy. Delay is subtle. It rarely announces itself. It grows through rationalization, through busyness, through the belief that there will always be more time. Michael confronts delay because delay erodes sensitivity. The longer instruction sits unanswered, the quieter discernment becomes. There is a reason Michael is often described as standing. Standing implies readiness, vigilance, and authority. He does not run, but he does not retreat. He remains positioned where divine intent meets human choice. His presence here signals that heaven has not withdrawn, but it will not endlessly repeat itself. God speaks, waits, and then enforces alignment, not to punish but to preserve connection. Silence, as spoken of earlier, exists to protect order. God will not continue pouring clarity into confusion. Michael's role is to correct the confusion before clarity is restored. This is why his involvement often feels confrontational. Confrontation is not rejection, it is intervention. Heaven intervenes when it values the outcome too much to allow drift. If resistance rises in you as you hear this, do not mistake it for disagreement. Resistance often surfaces when truth presses against comfort. Comfort resists change. Calling demands movement. Michael's authority presses gently but firmly against that resistance, not to crush it, but to expose it. Exposure brings choice back into your hands. God does not send Michael to those he has abandoned. He sends him to those he intends to keep aligned. Correction is proof of investment. Enforcement is evidence of value. Heaven does not enforce what it plans to discard. It enforces what it plans to fulfill. Order restores communication. When divine order is honored, prayer regains clarity. Not because God changed his posture, but because alignment was restored. Michael's intervention clears the interference that delay created. He does not bring new instruction. He reinforces what was already given. You are not being controlled. You are being safeguarded. Safeguarded from drifting so far that return becomes painful. Safeguarded from confusing patience with permission. Safeguarded from mistaking silence for abandonment. Archangel Michael stands at this moment because God's intention for you still matters, and heaven refuses to let it fade quietly. As this message continues, you will begin to see how restored order breaks silence, reopens spiritual flow, and returns clarity to prayer. This intervention happened now because timing still favors response. There is a reason this message keeps returning to the idea of blocked prayers, because what most people assume is spiritual distance is often something far more specific. When prayers feel as though they rise but never return with clarity, many blame timing, testing, or even their own worthiness. Yet the hidden reason prayers feel blocked is rarely about God withholding love or attention. It is almost always about misalignment between what is being asked and what has already been instructed. Heaven does not ignore prayers. It filters them through order. One of the most uncomfortable truths in the spiritual walk is this: unanswered prayer can be a form of mercy. God sees the full outcome of what we request, not just the relief we want in the moment. When alignment is off, an answer given too early or in the wrong posture can cause harm rather than healing. That is why heaven sometimes allows prayer to feel stalled. It is not refusal, it is restraint. And restraint is often the final protection before correction. Many believers pray sincerely while unknowingly resisting obedience. They pray for clarity but delay the step already revealed. They pray for peace but avoid the confrontation God asked them to face. They pray for breakthrough but cling to comfort zones that God already highlighted as temporary. This creates spiritual interference, not because God is confused, but because the heart is divided between desire and obedience. Divided posture weakens spiritual flow. There is also a difference between praying from faith and praying from fear. Fear-based prayer seeks relief. Faith-based prayer seeks alignment. When fear dominates, prayer becomes repetitive and urgent, yet shallow in obedience. Heaven listens, but heaven waits. God responds fully when prayer flows from trust expressed through action, not just words spoken with emotion. Another hidden factor is spiritual noise. Modern life is loud, not just externally, but internally. Constant stimulation dulls discernment. When discernment dulls, instruction becomes easy to postpone. Over time, that postponement creates a backlog of unaddressed nudges from God. Prayer continues, but listening fades. And prayer without listening becomes one-sided. Heaven is not silent in those moments. it is unheard. This is where many misinterpret silence as abandonment. But abandonment removes access. Silence preserves it. God remains near, but he waits for attention to return. Attention is not measured by how long you pray, but by how quickly you respond when clarity comes. Obedience sharpens hearing. Delay dulls it. Another reason prayers feel blocked is unresolved surrender. Surrender is not weakness. It is agreement. When God highlights something that must change, and the heart negotiates instead of yielding, prayer loses momentum. The cohesion keeps control. Surrender releases it. Heaven responds quickly to surrender because surrender removes resistance from the flow of grace. It is also important to understand that spiritual resistance does not always come from external opposition. Sometimes the resistance is internal, subtle, and rationalized. Thoughts like later, when things settle, or after this season seem harmless, but they delay alignment. Delay accumulates weight. Over time, that weight presses against prayer, making it feel heavy rather than freeing. God never blocks prayer to punish sincerity. He pauses response to redirect posture. The pause is an invitation to revisit what was last spoken. Often, the answer to your current prayer is hidden inside an earlier instruction you have not yet honored. Heaven does not stack instructions randomly. They build on each other. Ignoring one affects the next. This is why breakthrough sometimes comes suddenly after a small act of obedience. Not because the action earned God's response, but because it restored alignment. Alignment unlocks flow. Flow restores communication. Communication renews confidence in prayer. The blockage was never God's silence. It was misalignment's interference. You may feel exposed hearing this, but exposure is not accusation. It is illumination. God illuminates what he intends to heal. He reveals what he plans to restore. Blocked prayer is not the end of your spiritual life. It is the signal that something is ready to shift. The most freeing realization is this: nothing is permanently blocked. Heaven has not shut you out. The channel is still open, waiting for posture to realign. God's call is not about perfection. It is about response. Even a small step of obedience carries enormous spiritual weight because it signals willingness. As you move forward, understand this clearly. God is not asking for more effort, longer prayers, or louder declarations. He is asking for alignment. Alignment restores everything silence paused. And once alignment returns, prayer no longer feels forced. It flows naturally again. There are moments in the spiritual journey when opportunity does not announce itself with comfort, but with urgency. These moments are often described as windows, openings created by divine timing that allow movement, change, and realignment. A spiritual window is not permanent. It exists for a season, sometimes briefly, sometimes longer, but always with purpose. When God opens a window, he does so knowing the conditions on both sides. He knows what must pass through it, and he knows when it must close. Many people struggle with this truth because it challenges the belief that there will always be another chance later. While God's mercy is endless, timing is not always flexible. Scripture repeatedly shows that moments of divine opportunity require response. When they are ignored, God does not abandon the person, but the season shifts. And what could have been entered easily later requires far more effort, pain, or waiting. The danger of a closing window is not punishment. It is misalignment. When a window closes, it does not slam shut in anger. It closes quietly, often unnoticed, until the soul realizes that what once felt accessible now feels distant. Clarity fades. Momentum slows. Prayer becomes harder, not because God withdrew, but because the season that supported that movement has passed. This is why hesitation carries weight. Hesitation feels harmless because it is passive, but spiritually, passivity has consequences. Divine windows respond to movement. Faith is not urgency driven by fear. It is action driven by trust. When God signals that a window is open, He is inviting cooperation, not forcing compliance. But cooperation delayed becomes opportunity lost. Many people misread patience as waiting indefinitely. True patience is active trust, not inactivity. It listens closely and responds promptly. Delay often disguises itself as discernment, but discernment produces clarity, not avoidance. When clarity has already been given and action is postponed, the delay is no longer wisdom, it is resistance. Windows close because seasons change. God operates in seasons because growth depends on timing. Seeds planted outside their season do not thrive. Doors opened outside their season create confusion. Windows exist to allow smooth transition between what was and what is coming next. When those windows are ignored, transition becomes forced rather than guided. You may recognize this pattern in your own life. Moments where you felt clearly led, deeply stirred, or strongly prompted, yet you waited. Life continued. The urgency faded. And later, when you tried to return to that same sense of clarity, it felt muted. That was not God withdrawing His love. It was the window completing its purpose without your participation. This part of the message is not meant to induce regret. Regret looks backward and drains strength. Awareness looks forward and restores it. God reveals the nature of spiritual windows so that future moments are not missed the same way. The point is not to mourn what passed, but to recognize what is present. Right now, this message itself represents a window, not because it contains all answers, but because it carries timing. Timing that aligns awareness with opportunity. Ignoring it does not erase God's plan, but it alters the path by which that plan unfolds. Some paths are smoother because they are entered on time. Others are steeper because they are entered late. The phrase "this can close without warning" is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to sharpen your discernment. Windows rarely announce their closing. They simply lose urgency. The pull weakens. The clarity dulls. And suddenly, what once felt obvious feels distant. That distance is not punishment. It is transition without alignment. God prefers to guide rather than correct, but correction becomes necessary when guidance is ignored. Windows are guidance. They are God saying, "Now is the time." When now becomes later, guidance turns into discipline. Not harsh, but instructive. Discipline teaches through consequence what instruction tried to teach through clarity. It is important to understand that windows do not close because God grows tired of waiting. They close because their purpose is complete. A season designed for initiation will not remain open indefinitely. A moment designed for obedience will not linger forever. God honors His own timing because timing protects outcome. You are not being rushed. You are being invited to respond. The response does not mean perfection. It means movement. Even a small step in the right direction keeps you within the window's grace. Stagnation pushes you outside of it. As this unfolds, let this truth settle deeply. Spiritual opportunities are gifts, but they require stewardship. Awareness without action wastes them. Action aligned with timing multiplies them. What follows will show how to recognize whether a window is still open and how to respond before clarity fades again. There is a profound difference between God speaking and us being positioned to hear. Many assume that hearing God is about volume or clarity from heaven, but in truth, It is far more about posture on earth. God is always speaking, always guiding, always inviting alignment, yet not every heart is positioned to receive clearly. Spiritual hearing is not blocked by God's silence as much as it is shaped by our internal state. Position determines perception. Being positioned to hear God does not mean being perfect, righteous, or free from struggle. It means being attentive, available, and honest. God does not compete with noise. He does not shout over distraction. He waits until the heart quiets enough to listen. This is why some people feel God clearly during moments of surrender or crisis, while others feel distant during seasons of comfort. Comfort often dulls urgency. Urgency sharpens attention. Noise is one of the greatest barriers to spiritual hearing. Not just external noise, but internal clutter, unresolved emotions, constant mental stimulation, and unexamined fear create static that distorts God's voice. When the soul is crowded, discernment weakens. God's guidance does not disappear. It becomes harder to distinguish. This is why posture matters more than effort. You do not hear God by trying harder. You hear Him by making space. Spiritual posture begins with humility. Humility is not self-criticism, it is openness. It is the willingness to admit, I may not see everything clearly right now. That admission alone realigns the heart. God speaks most clearly where defensiveness ends. When the heart stops justifying delay and begins seeking direction, sensitivity returns. Another key element of posture is stillness. Stillness does not mean inactivity. It means intentional quiet. God's voice is often described as gentle, not because it lacks power, but because it respects freedom. Loud environments drown out subtle guidance. When life is filled with constant input, God's voice becomes one among many, easily overlooked. Stillness is how you elevate His voice above the rest. Here is also the posture of expectation. Expectation sharpens awareness. When you expect God to speak, you notice more. When you assume He is silent, you stop listening. Expectation does not demand. It anticipates. It creates readiness. God often speaks to those who are looking for Him, not those who are merely talking at Him. Positioning also involves obedience to what has already been heard. God rarely reveals the next step while the previous one remains ignored. Hearing builds on the hearing. Each act of obedience sharpens discernment for the next instruction. Delay dulls it. This is why some people feel they once heard God clearly but no longer do. It is not because God stopped speaking. It is because responsiveness shifted. Fear also affects posture. Fear tightens the heart. It narrows focus. It turns listening into self-protection. When fear dominates, God's voice can be mistaken for pressure or dismissed as imagination. Faith-based posture relaxes the heart enough to receive correction without panic and guidance without resistance. Another overlooked aspect is sincerity. God responds to honest hearts, not polished ones. When prayer becomes performative, hearing weakens. When prayer becomes honest, clarity increases. God does not require perfect words. He responds to truthful posture. Sometimes the clearest hearing begins with admitting confusion rather than pretending certainty. Distraction is not always sinful. It is often subtle. Busy schedules, constant responsibilities, and endless content consume attention gradually. None of these are inherently wrong, but they shape posture over time. If attention is never given space to rest, spiritual awareness fades. God does not force interruptions. He waits for invitation. Positioning yourself to hear often means intentionally stepping away from what constantly demands attention. It is also important to understand that posture is not permanent. It must be maintained. Sensitivity is cultivated, not inherited. Even spiritually mature people must continually realign. Hearing God is not a one-time achievement. It is a daily posture. If you feel distant from God's voice right now, that distance is not condemnation. It is information. It tells you something about posture, not worth. God's desire to speak is not chained. The invitation remains open. Positioning yourself to hear does not require drastic change. It often begins with small adjustments, quiet moments, honest prayer, surrendered expectations, and willingness to respond. These small shifts restore sensitivity faster than dramatic gestures ever could. As you realign posture, hearing sharpens naturally. Clarity returns not through force, but through openness. God speaks where He is welcome, and welcome begins with posture. There is a moment in every spiritual journey when everything pivots, not because circumstances change immediately, but because response replaces hesitation. This is the turning point. It is the moment heaven had been waiting for. When you respond to God, not perfectly, not fearlessly, but sincerely, something shifts in the unseen realm before anything changes in the visible one. Alignment begins quietly, but its effects are powerful. Response is different from intention. Intention lives in thought. Response lives in action. Many people intend to obey God, intend to change, intend to realign, but heaven responds to movement, not plans. The moment you respond, even in a small way, you signal readiness. That signal activates what silence was holding back. Silence does not disappear because time passed. It breaks because posture changed. When response happens, the first thing restored is clarity. Not always about everything, but about the next step. God rarely reveals the entire path at once. He restores flow one step at a time. The confusion that once felt heavy begins to lift, replaced by quiet certainty. This certainty is not emotional excitement. It is grounded peace. Peace is often the first confirmation that alignment has returned. Another immediate shift is sensitivity. What once felt dull begins to sharpen. Scripture feels alive again. Prayer feels less forced. Discernment becomes clearer. This is not because God suddenly moved closer, but because resistance moved aside. Heaven was never far. Interference was simply removed. Response clears the channel. Angelic assistance is also activated at this point. Throughout spiritual history, angels move in response to obedience. Not because humans command them, but because obedience aligns with divine instruction, and angels serve God's will. When alignment returns, assistance follows naturally. What felt stalled begins to move. What felt blocked begins to open. It is important to understand that response does not mean everything becomes easy instantly. Obedience does not eliminate challenge, it reorders it. Challenges faced in alignment carry grace. Challenges faced in misalignment carry strain. The difference is not in difficulty, but in support. When you respond, you are no longer carrying weight alone. Many people wait for confirmation before responding, but heaven often waits for response before confirmation. Faith moves first. Confirmation follows. This is why the turning point feels risky. It requires trust without full visibility. But that trust is exactly what restores flow. God honors movement rooted in faith far more than hesitation rooted in fear. Response also restores authority in prayer. Prayers prayed from alignment carry confidence. Not arrogance, but assurance. Assurance that you are standing where God asked you to stand. That assurance strengthens prayer more than volume ever could. Heaven responds to alignment because alignment reflects agreement. This turning point is not dramatic on the surface. It often looks simple. a decision, a conversation, a release, a commitment. But spiritually, it is seismic. It marks the moment where delay ends and movement begins. Heaven knows that moment. If you feel something stirring as you hear this, that stirring is invitation. Do not analyze it to death. Response does not require understanding everything. It requires trusting enough to move. God does not expect flawless obedience. He responds to willing hearts. What you must understand is this: alignment restores what silence paused. Silence was never meant to be permanent. It existed to protect timing. Now timing is shifting because response is possible. Type "I respond in faith" in the comments if your spirit is ready. Blessing code 682 is now activated. This turning point you just felt is not only for you. It is meant to ripple outward and reach others who are still standing in silence. Hear the Lord speaking personally now. When you release what is in your hand, I release what is in mine. Your support becomes a seed that turns this message into a river, carrying light into places you may never see, but heaven fully counts. I am being led to tell you directly, your obedience here is not small, it is prophetic. Scripture is alive as God declares, those who water others will themselves be watered. This is not about giving money, it is about responding to God's movement. Act now through Super Thanks, membership, or PayPal. The link is in the description and the PayPal QR code is appearing on the screen. Step forward and seal this moment with action, because heaven honors response. Moments like this are never meant to remain only internal. When God calls and you finally respond, heaven marks that moment, but alignment is sealed through action. This is where many people unknowingly weaken what was just restored. They feel clarity, peace, or conviction, yet they treat it as a private experience rather than a directional shift. In the spiritual realm, what is not sealed is vulnerable. What is not reinforced can be revisited by doubt, distraction, or delay. Sealing the call does not mean making loud declarations or dramatic promises. It means intentionally anchoring what God has spoken into your daily posture. Alignment must be protected, because resistance does not disappear the moment obedience begins. Often, resistance becomes quieter and more strategic. It whispers things like "this can wait," where you don't need to act on this right now. That is why sealing matters. It closes the door hesitation tries to reopen. God often asks for simple actions after profound moments. These actions are not insignificant. They are confirmations. When you take deliberate steps after receiving clarity, you tell heaven, your own spirit, and the unseen realm that this moment was not emotional, it was directional. Directional decisions require reinforcement. One of the most powerful ways to seal alignment is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement turns awareness into agreement. When you acknowledge what God is doing, you strengthen it internally. Silence after revelation can slowly drain its power. This is why Scripture emphasizes confession and testimony. Not because God needs to hear it, but because you do. Speaking agreement stabilizes conviction. Another way alignment is sealed is through participation. Spiritual truth is reinforced when it moves from observation to involvement. This is why engaging with this message matters. Not passively watching, but actively responding. When you like this message, you are not feeding a platform. You are marking a moment. When you comment, even briefly, you are placing a spiritual marker that says, "I recognize what God is doing here." When you share it, you are extending the alignment outward, and alignment multiplies when it is shared. If this message has clarified something in you, do not treat it casually. Seal it intentionally. Like this message as an act of agreement. Leave a comment as a sign of acknowledgement. Share it with someone who may be standing in the same quiet uncertainty you once stood in. And subscribe to this channel so you remain connected to messages that sharpen spiritual awareness and protect sensitivity. These actions are not about routine engagement. They are about reinforcing obedience. Sealing the call also means guarding your environment. After alignment, discernment increases. You may suddenly notice distractions that once felt normal now feel heavy. Conversations that drain clarity. Habits that dull sensitivity. This is not judgment. It is awareness. Alignment exposes what offends it. You are not required to fix everything at once. You are only required to honor what God highlights. Small, consistent adjustments preserve momentum. Patience is another key to sealing alignment. Many people expect immediate visible change, and when it does not arrive quickly, they question whether anything really shifted. But alignment often produces stability before acceleration. God stabilizes posture before He increases movement. Peace often comes before progress. Do not mistake quiet reinforcement for inactivity. Heaven is establishing foundation. Doubt may attempt to revisit you after this moment. This does not mean alignment failed. Doubt often appears after decisions, not before. His purpose is to test commitment. When doubt speaks, do not reanalyze everything. Return to the clarity you already received. Clarity fades when it is constantly questioned. It strengthens when it is remembered. Consistency seals what emotion can't sustain. You do not need to feel the same intensity every day to remain aligned. You only need to remain responsive. Alignment is maintained through steady obedience, not constant emotional confirmation. God honors consistency far more than intensity. It is also important to remain connected. God often uses repetition to protect alignment. Hearing truth reinforced keeps sensitivity sharp. Isolation weakens the conviction over time. Stay connected to spaces that strengthen discernment rather than dilute it. Alignment thrives where truth is echoed. This part of the journey is quieter than the turning point, but it is critical. What you reinforce now determines how long alignment lasts. Heaven has responded to your posture. Now you steward what has been restored. Stay with this message, because what comes next reveals how sealed alignment transforms not just your prayers, but your future direction in ways you may not yet expect. When alignment is restored and obedience has replaced hesitation, the spiritual environment around you begins to change. This change is often described as open heavens, not as a dramatic spectacle, but as a restoration of flow. Open heavens do not mean life suddenly becomes effortless or free from challenge. They mean that resistance no longer dominates movement. They mean communication between you and God feels alive again. Where silence once felt heavy, connection now feels accessible. The first sign of open heavens is not external breakthrough, but internal peace. This peace is not emotional excitement or temporary relief. It is a settled assurance that you are no longer fighting against something unseen. Prayer stops feeling strained. You are no longer searching for the right words. Instead, prayer becomes relational again. You speak, and you sense that you are being heard, not because circumstances instantly change, but because alignment has been restored. Clarity is another unmistakable sign. Confusion begins to lift, not all at once, but enough for you to recognize direction. You may not have the full picture, but you know what the next step is. Decisions that once felt overwhelming become simpler. Distractions lose their authority. This clarity is not the result of analysis. It is the fruit of alignment. When posture is right, direction becomes lighter. With open heavens, responsiveness in prayer returns. Scripture begins to speak again in personal ways. Insight surfaces naturally. You are no longer forcing understanding. It comes quietly. Answers may not always be immediate, but they are no longer absent. Heaven feels near again, not distant. The relationship feels restored, not transactional. Momentum also begins to return. Areas of life that felt stalled slowly start moving. Conversations shift. Opportunities emerge. Doors open without excessive effort. This movement is not something you manufacture. It flows naturally because resistance has been removed. Alignment allows grace to operate efficiently. It is important to understand that open heavens do not remove responsibility. They increase it. When God restores flow, He entrusts you with clarity. Clarity requires stewardship. Alignment must be maintained, not revisited only when things feel difficult. Open heavens respond to ongoing posture, not occasional attention. Another sign of open heavens is peace in waiting. Waiting no longer feels like punishment or neglect. It feels purposeful. You trust timing because you are no longer fighting it. You understand that delay does not mean denial. Waiting becomes active rather than anxious. You feel positioned, not stuck. Open heavens also bring refinement. As flow increases, misalignment becomes easier to detect. Certain habits, environments, where relationships may begin to feel heavy or out of place. This is not rejection. It is guidance. God opens heaven not to overwhelm you, but to lead you. Refinement protects openness. Sensitivity increases as well. Discernment sharpens. You notice quickly what drains your peace or dulls your clarity. This sensitivity is not meant to isolate you. It is meant to protect alignment. Guarding sensitivity preserves flow. It is crucial not to romanticize open heavens as constant spiritual intensity. That expectation creates disappointment. Open heavens are about consistency, not constant emotion. Some days will feel ordinary, but alignment remains. God works powerfully in ordinary obedience. Flow does not require constant excitement. Gratitude also returns naturally under open heavens. You begin to notice small blessings again. Gratitude is a sign of peace. Peace sustains alignment. When gratitude fades, entitlement grows, and flow weakens. Maintaining gratitude keeps heaven open. Comfort can still be dangerous if it dulls awareness. Open heavens do not close suddenly. They fade gradually when attention drifts. This is why awareness matters. Stay attentive, not anxious. Awareness protects alignment without creating fear. God does not threaten to close heaven. He invites you to remain aligned within it. Heaven opens because posture invited it. It remains open because posture is maintained. This season often marks deeper transformation. Not instant miracles, but steady change. Prayer deepens. Decisions become clearer. Confidence becomes quieter but stronger. You are no longer striving for God's attention. You are walking with it. Silence was never meant to be permanent. It existed to redirect the posture. Now posture has shifted, and flow has returned. Open heavens are not a reward. They are the environment alignment creates. As this continues, you will begin to see how God uses this restored flow to prepare you for what comes next, and why this season is not an ending, but a foundation for what He intends to build through your obedience. What began as a warning now begins to reveal its true intention. This message was never meant to leave you in fear or tension. God does not warn to frighten. He warns to rescue. When heaven speaks about silence, blocked prayers, or urgency, it is not announcing abandonment. It is extending mercy before distance grows deeper. This is the part many misunderstand. They hear correction and assume rejection, but divine correction is always rooted in preservation. God's nature has never been to withdraw without first reaching out. From the beginning of spiritual history, every warning carried an invitation. Every confrontation carrying compassion beneath it. When God highlights what is misaligned, it is because He intends to restore what is valuable. He does not expose to shame, He exposes to heal. This message itself is evidence of mercy, not judgment. Mercy often arrives disguised as urgency. It feels uncomfortable because it interrupts patterns we have grown used to. Comfort resists interruption, even when comfort is slowly suffocating growth. God disrupts comfort not to destabilize you, but to save you from drifting further than you realize. Silence was never meant to punish you. It was meant to protect you until you were ready to hear again. This is why the tone of this message shifts here. A warning has done its work. Awareness has been raised. Alignment has begun. Now mercy steps forward clearly. Mercy says you are still called. Mercy says you are still seen. Mercy says it is not too late. God does not reopen communication reluctantly. He restores it gladly when posture changes. Many people carry guilt over seasons of delay. They replay moments they wish they had responded differently. But guilt is not God's language. Conviction points forward. Guilt chains you backward. God does not ask you to relive missed moments. He asks you to steward the present one. Mercy releases you from regret so that obedience can remain light rather than burdened. The enemy often tries to twist warnings into condemnation. He wants you to believe that delay has disqualified you. But God's mercy operates on a different level. Mercy does not erase consequence automatically, but it redeems direction. Even when timing has shifted, purpose remains intact. God is a redeemer of paths, not just outcomes. This is why this message did not end with silence, but with restoration. Heaven did not go permanently quiet. It paused to get your attention, and attention have been given. That alone changes everything. God values responsiveness more than flawless timing. A heart that turns back quickly is more powerful than one that never stumbled. Mercy also restores trust. Trust in prayer. Trust in hearing God again. Trust that silence does not define your future. Many people fear praying after seasons of distance because they are afraid nothing will happen. But mercy meets that fear gently. It reassures you that the channel is open again. Not because you earned it, but because God desired it all along. It is important to understand that mercy does not remove responsibility. It restores relationship. God did not say, "Forget what happened." He says, "Walk forward with me now." Mercy strengthens obedience because it removes fear from it. Fear-based obedience is unstable. Mercy-based obedience is sustainable. You may still feel cautious. That is normal. Trust rebuilds gradually. God is patient with that process. He does not demand instant confidence. He invites continued response. Each small act of obedience strengthens trust further. Each answered prayer rebuilds expectation. Mercy works incrementally, but effectively. This is also where gratitude deepens. Gratitude grows when you realize what could have happened, but did not. Silence could have remained misunderstood. Distance could have grown. But instead, awareness came. The awareness itself is mercy. Gratitude anchors humility, and humility preserves alignment. Do not minimize this moment. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was decisive. You were warned not to be threatened, but to be redirected. And redirection is mercy in action. God corrects the course of what He intends to keep. As you move forward, remember this truth clearly. God's warnings are invitations wrapped in urgency. His silence is not rejection. It is restraint. And His mercy is always closer than fear suggests. You are not being watched with disappointment. You are being guided with care. What remains now is not fear of silence, but confidence in connection. Heaven has spoken because heaven still cares deeply about your alignment, your prayer, and your future. My care does not fade. The final part will bring everything together, not with threat, but with assurance, peace, and spiritual upliftment, so that you move forward strengthened rather than shaken. This is where everything settles, not into fear but into assurance. From the very beginning, this message was never about threatening you with silence or distancing you from God. It was about awakening you before distance could grow unnoticed. Now that awareness has come, alignment has begun, and mercy has been revealed, the tone shifts fully into restoration. God does not leave His children shaken. He leaves them strengthened. Take a moment to look back at the journey of this message. It began with urgency because urgency was needed. It spoke of silence because silence had meaning. It confronted delay not to shame you but to redirect you. And now it closes with truth that must be anchored deeply in your spirit. God has not abandoned you. Heaven has not closed its doors to you. And your prayers are not falling into emptiness. The very fact that you reached this moment proves that connection was never severed. What heaven wanted most was not fear-driven obedience, but awakened alignment. God does not want servants who move only when afraid. He desires children who respond because they trust His voice. Everything spoken here was meant to restore trust, not replace it with anxiety. Silence was not a threat. It was a signal. And signals exist to guide, not destroy. You are leaving this message with clarity, not condemnation. With direction, not dread. With peace, not pressure. That is how God works when His purpose is restoration. He does not overwhelm, He reassures. He does not confuse, He confirms. He does not abandon, He redirects. Understand this clearly as you move forward. Prayer is not fragile. Your relationship with God is not hanging by a thread. Heaven is not waiting to go silent the moment you stumble again. God's patience is deeper than your fears. What He asks for is attentiveness, not perfection. Responsiveness, not flawlessness. Alignment, not anxiety. You may still face moments of uncertainty. That is part of being human. But now you know how to respond when those moments come. You know that silence invites reflection, not panic. You know that clarity returns through posture, not pressure. You know that God speaks because He cares, and He corrects because He intends to keep you close. Carry this assurance with you. Obedience is not a burden when it is rooted in love. It becomes heavy only when it is rooted in fear. Let fear fall away. Let trust remain. God is not counting your missteps. He is guiding your steps. From this point forward, let prayer be relational again. Let worship be genuine again. Let obedience be intentional, not delayed. Not because you are afraid of silence, but because you value connection. Heaven responds to hearts that choose alignment willingly. This message ends not with warning but with blessing. Not with pressure but with peace. Not with urgency but with confidence. You are not late. You are not forgotten. You are not disconnected. You are aware, aligned, and invited to continue walking forward with God attentively. Type "I walk in alignment" in the comments if you receive this assurance. Blessing code 941 is now activated. Let this be the moment you remember, not as a warning you feared, but as a turning point that restored your confidence in hearing God, trusting His timing, and walking forward without anxiety. Heaven is not silent toward you. Heaven is near. As this message closes in peace, hear God speaking directly to your heart. As you help my word travel, I cover your path with favor. What you have just received was not meant to stop with you. It was meant to reach others standing where you once stood. I am inviting you personally now to take part in this mission, because your support becomes a seed that carries light into silent places. Scripture lives as God declares, those who sow generously will reap generously. This is not a suggestion. It is a divine moment of response. Support this work through Super Thanks, membership, or PayPal. The donation links are in the description and the PayPal QR code is appearing on the screen. Step forward now and seal this message with action, because obedience releases blessing, and heaven honors those who move when God speaks.